Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day one of the California Small Farm Conference. This is our 35th annual event. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance of Family Farmers, and we're thrilled to have you here. If you are looking for Ag Wells 101, you are in the right place. We've got a video we're going to share on Ag Wells, and then we're going to pass it on to today's presenter, Lilian, who's going to tell you more about that and be able to answer some questions. So before I dive into that, just want to encourage folks, there is the chat feature right there. You'll be able to jump into that and post questions, comments. We'll be able to share some relevant, maybe some links and resources perhaps in there as well. But I encourage you to do that. We'll use those questions for Lillian to answer after the video. Yeah, I think that's it in terms of introduction. We've got a lot to cover in the great wide world of wells. So let's go ahead and dig in. I'm going to start the video.
Welcome to the Ag Wells 101 workshop, part of the 2023 Small Farms Conference hosted by Community Alliance with Family Farmers. My name is Lilian Thaoxaochay. I'm a small farms community educator with the UC Cooperative Extension in Fresno County. To provide a little bit of background, our team in Fresno County has been providing technical assistance or TA for SWEEP since 2014. And beginning in 2021, the Small Farms Expanded Network has been supporting growers on a number of topics, ranging from pesticide application to food safety, and now drought-related issues throughout the state of California. This is an ongoing process, so please feel free to reach out to the TA provider nearest you. Throughout this workshop, we'll be talking about a number of programs or resources for small farms drought support. If you are watching this on a computer, feel free to pause the video and scan the QR code in the upper right-hand corner by pointing your camera phone at it. If you have internet, the link to the website will appear. You can also contact CAFF or myself for that information if you need it and cannot find it. For those of you who might not know, SWEEP is the California Department of Food and Agriculture's State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program, which provides farmers with grants currently up to $200,000 to upgrade their irrigation system to reduce water waste by switching to drip, installing soil moisture sensors, and/or using variable frequency drives. Although SWEEP is currently closed, we anticipate applications opening up again later this year in 2023. You can find out more information about the program's previously funded projects on the CDFA website. For most of the last year, our team and network has been focused on drought support for small-scale growers throughout the state. This includes a wide range of services, including technical assistance for losses and emergency repairs due to drought. This work is funded in large part by the CDFA CUS program for underserved and small producers, established in 2021. Obviously, I can't be everywhere all at once, but the Small Farms Network has offices in 7 regions spanning 16 counties and counting, and we can provide services in 8 languages. Please feel free to contact the team nearest you if you need assistance. As we all know, due to multiple drought years, surface water is becoming less and less available, and the demand for groundwater has skyrocketed. According to the California Department of Water Resources, or DWR, whereas in a normal year, California's underground reserves contribute 38% of the state's total water supply, in dry years, groundwater contributes 46% of the state's annual supply. In some regions, diminishing groundwater provides 100% of certain communities' water needs for drinking, daily use, and agricultural production. In 2014, then Governor Brown signed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, into law. This is the first groundwater regulatory law in the history of California. We don't have time today to go over all the goals of SGMA, but you can contact your local Groundwater Sustainable Agency, or GSA, for more information about your region's short and long-term groundwater plans, including options for new or replacement wells. The Ag Wells 101 workshop is designed for small-scale growers who rely largely on groundwater or groundwater in combination with some surface water or other types of water deliveries. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 3 very important measurements you need to know about your well and pump, whether you are leasing or owning the property you are farming on. While this information has always been important, due to persistent drought, this information is now critical for all farmers to know and understand to assess their farm's future viability, including questions around, am I having a pump issue or a well issue? As an example, in Fresno County, if it is a pump issue, growers can expect a cost of $1,200 to $10,000 for inspections, lowering, and/or replacements. If it is a well issue and growers want to deepen, replace, or get a new well, 200 feet can cost anywhere from $35,000 to $50,000 without materials right now, up about $10,000 from just 5 years ago. Knowing your well depth, water levels, and pump setting can help reduce costs by preventing issues before they happen. We'll also talk about regular maintenance on your pumps to avoid the need for emergency repairs through the height of the summer months. So the first thing we need to know is your well depth. Usually the records of any wells on a property are kept by the landowners. If this information is unknown or has been lost, you can also look for it on OSCAR, DWR's online system of well completion reports. You can search by address or coordinates. If your well is older than 1970, you might need to request a search through their not yet digitized paper archives, and they'll mail you the information if it is available. If there is no record at all of your well, you may need to pay for a well video survey. Some surveys are more invasive than others, and depending on the status of your well, like whether it is caved in or needs repair at various lengths, this may also impact your ability to survey it. Contact a local well company for services and pricing. However, if you've had pump work done recently or are planning to pull out your pump for any reason, consider asking for a well evaluation simultaneously. In regards to your well, there are 2 water level measurements you need to know: the standing level and the pumping level of the water. The standing level, or static water depth, is the distance between the ground surface to the top of the water in your well. To do this, keep your pump turned off and locate the sounding port on your setup and drop a line until it hits water. Measure this length, and now you know how far down your well goes before there is water. Here we are using a well sounder, which is just a fancy measuring tape with beads that when are submerged in water beep, letting you know you've hit water. As you can see, you can do this yourself with minimal equipment, or you can pay a well or pump company to take the measurement for you. If you do it yourself, drop the line slowly and check it at regular intervals so that it does not get caught on anything in the well. Now that we know the standing level, we need to know the pumping level. The pumping level is the water level once you turn on your pump. This drop is called drawdown, which varies from area to area depending on the demand on your aquifer and its characteristics. In some areas, the water just doesn't move as fast towards the pump to refill the water that is being pulled up through your pump. Pumping levels may be substantially lower than standing levels. Other things that may affect pumping level is the number of people pumping water at one time. So at night, usually drawdown is reduced, which means you might seem to have a little bit more water than in the daytime. And during seasons where larger farms are pumping less water, like harvest season for almonds, drawdown again is less and water levels might rise temporarily. It's not always possible or practical to continually measure your groundwater situation. You can visit DWR's Groundwater Live program on their website. It monitors groundwater levels throughout the state at regular intervals using more than 8,000 wells. The website gives you an idea of the water situation in your area. On most of our farms, we see one of 2 types of pumps, submersible or turbine pumps. Submersible pump motors are completely underground. There is an issue, the whole thing will need to be pulled up. These types of pumps require more frequent repair or replacement due to their placement underground. A turbine pump's motor is on the surface, and installation, repair, and inspection is usually cheaper. But I found a lot of growers assume because they can see the pump motor and it looks okay or is operational, it must be okay. This is not always true. Every 5 years or so, you should have a pump efficiency test conducted on your pump to make sure it's operating efficiently. Pump efficiency tests also measure flow, discharge pressure, and power use. Some RCDs offer this service for free. You can also contact Fresno State's Center for Irrigation Technology, or CIT, for a subsidized pump efficiency test. The Small Farms TA network can also assist in locating a vendor. Tests run $250 to $400, depending on the horsepower of your pump. Most pumps will not be set at the lowest part of your well, because that kind of setting requires more energy to pull water to the surface. Also, being too close to the ground opens up the potential for sucking up sand, whether or not you have a filter on your system. If your pump is producing more and more sand each year, you may be approaching the bottom of your well, or this may be an indication that the casing for your well needs repair. If you've had work done on your pump previously, that last company may have a record noting the setting or depth of your pump. You want your pump to be in water, so set below the most current pumping level water measurement. If your pump is not in water and producing consistent flow, it can free spin and burn out. Replacing a burned out pump costs much more than lowering a pump. Again, as an example, in Fresno County, we're looking at $1,200 to $3,000 to lower a pump versus $5,000 to $10,000 for a brand new pump. In the past, it was expected that we would lose a foot or so of water each year. But with current drought conditions, some areas can lose 5 to 10 feet per year. Growers have to lower more frequently than in the past. Maintenance that was done once every 10 years might need to be done sooner or more frequently as well. If you're not able to lower your pump or at the bottom of your well, you'll need a replacement well or a new well. Pump and well companies are struggling to keep up with demand. Wait times can be 3 months to 12 months. If this might be your situation, it's important to call around beforehand and get on a wait list if you're anticipating well issues. I come from a multi-generational farming family. The previous 2 droughts have caused tremendous strain, both financially and emotionally. This workshop is designed to provide you with some resources for locating basic information about your private wells and pumps if you're a small-scale grower. We've provided the links where possible for you to do your own research. I want to thank all of our partners who have contributed to my ability to present this for you all today. Again, the UCANR Small Farms Network providing CAFF technical assistance and outreach, which is connected to the larger UCANR network of advisors and specialists working on groundwater and irrigation issues, is here to help. If we can't answer your question, we can consult with our network of water experts and partner organizations. Please feel free to reach out. We've also provided a last slide of drought support resources for emergency financial support, which changes monthly, links to some long-term water efficiency programs at both USDA and CDFA, as well as some farm financing partners. Please feel free to explore these. Thank you for attending the AgWells 101 workshop. Again, I'm Lilian Thaoxaochay, Small Farms Community Educator with the UCANR Small Farms Network team in Fresno County. For those of you who need support, check out our website to find a TA provider nearest you. I'm available for questions if there are any. Thank you for attending.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lilian, for that wonderful video. Hope you guys all learned something. So we're going to go ahead and pass it on to Lilian. And if you want to add any additional thoughts or comments about the video, and then we'll dive into some of the questions. So again, if you're just joining us here at the workshop or in AgWells 101, use the chat function to drop in any comments or questions, and we'll try to get those answered. We also have some other folks who I know are attending who have some experience in SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act as well. And so there's a few other people here at the workshop who can maybe assist in answering some of those questions as well. So with that, Lilian, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so it has been an insanely busy 2 months since we have been back from our holiday vacation, and there are a lot of demands on some of our more professional partners. And so they're not here today to answer very specific questions. I'll try to answer what I'm able to. And again, The workshop was designed the video, which will be posted later, was designed specifically for you to be able to pause it. And I do apologize. I know I speak quite fast. I attempted to slow down in that video, but the most practical way to use it, again, is to play it and pause it. So one, you can scan the screens to find the resources. Also, if you're trying to find those 3 measurements that I talked about, definitely feel free to slow the video down or pause it to kind of do those things. And so hopefully, it's a good way for you guys to be able to connect to resources. At the end of the day, I think what I found in the last 18 months since the state and I think UCANR has been really focusing on technical assistance for drought support. They've been doing it for quite some time, actually, but the current TA network of CAFF providers out of CDFA, we've been on for about 18 months doing this very targeted work. And again, we've inspected a couple hundred wells at this point. I've read at least 300 applications of folks who are having various issues all over the place. And so what's hard about a California-wide workshop is being able to give you specific answers about how to access resources for your area. Because again, what I found most growers will ask me after walking them through this information is, can you come to my farm? Or does someone come to this farm? And again, Juan Medrano has asked this question about pump efficiency tests in Northern California. If you go to the Fresno State CIT website, they will able to link you up with a partner in that area for those subsidized pump efficiency tests. And again, Fresno State doesn't do all of them. They again have a contract with PG&E to subsidize them, and they have a series of partners who are much, much closer to you, wherever it is you are, that can help you with that. And then Dave Renston has asked this question around screens. And so there are screens both on your pump and then in the well itself. There's a thing they call a casing. And so over time, as the well collapses, that casing itself may also become damaged. And then there are also screens around the pump to protect it, to reduce kind of the way it suctions up sand. But of course, over time, all this stuff is undergrounded in water. And so it kind of gets destroyed. And so again, that's why I'm saying folks with submersible pumps, I found when your motor stops working because of all of the interior underground damage, you pull the whole thing up to take a look at it. And so although submersible pumps are a little bit they're a little bit cheaper. They do require maintenance more regularly, but I think that's helped a number of folks who are like, something's wrong with it. So in order to look at it, they've had to have pump companies come and pull it out, and then they'll see actually more damage than before. Whereas if you have a turbine pump, if the motor is above ground, again, if it's operational and it's taking oil like it normally does, you tend to not think, let's pull it out, because there is a risk of when you pull out a pump that it's stuck. And or your well collapses or some other structural issues that might happen depending on the age of your pump and your well. And so that's kind of always a risk that growers take, that you might have minimum water flow to no water flow. And again, you might be budgeting $3,000 for a pump repair. And if something happens with your well as you're pulling out your pump, the cost can jump very easily to $15,000. So there are a couple of questions. Again, Michelle has asked, does a turbine pump only go to less depth? From what I understand, they do go the same depths. The lower you go, of course, the more energy you're going to need to pull water to the surface, but also depending on where you are specifically, you might not be able to drill quite as far. So most vegetable growers that we work with in Fresno are anywhere between 80 and 250 feet only. And then to go any deeper than that gets prohibitively expensive. Right now, 200 to 250 for feet used to cost $35,000 as a higher end ceiling price. Right now, that's easily $50,000. And so one, it's quite expensive depending on your operation to go deeper than 250 in some areas. And yes, larger farms tend to go deeper. A lot of the pump companies here have been going a couple thousand feet for certain farms that can, one, absorb the cost, but two, also handle the electricity bill charges for that. And so it's been a bit tricky with our small scale growers. And again, it doesn't quite matter what if you're using a turbine or a submersible, it comes down at the end of the day to how you want to do daily maintenance or like normal maintenance. And so I've had a couple of turbine folks switch over to a submersible because right now the cost for the submersible is more affordable than the turbines. But there isn't necessarily, from my perspective, a plus or like one is better than the other. Again, has to do with familiarity. And as you talk costs and function with your pump company, that is going to be probably the best generic advice I can give. And again, if you have issues with water testing, there's probably a water testing like area center or lab in your area. There are a couple of state resources as well. I would check again with your RCD, which is your resource conservation district, or even your GSA. They're probably connected to each other. If you have domestic wells, like in Fresno, KRCD also handles domestic well water testing. And one of the labs they use, our farmers are able to use to also test their water, as well as submit soil samples and whatnot. Let's see, we have a well that supplies water to our home and our farm and it's not metered. How do we get this tested? Yes, so again, I would check with your resource conservation districts and your groundwater sustainability agencies. They, if there is subsidized domestic water testing, they'll let you know. If you happen to use a domestic well for agricultural purposes on something smaller than 5 acres, then they may have you absorb that cost. And I think in our area that runs about $100 to get your water tested. And there are different programs available in different regions to support if you need like water to be brought in, at least for domestic use. Right now, there is not a whole lot of support for bringing in water for agricultural purposes other than for livestock, from what I understand, out of USDA FSA, although there is some promise that vegetable and row crop growers may get support there, but not quite sure yet. Are there any questions I've missed? You can feel free to raise your hand as well if you want to ask, if that's an option, or you can also type them in the chat. Yes, so I don't know if tribal territories have GSAs. Dave, if you're on here, maybe you'll know more than I will how that is managed. But that is all managed by your GSA. I know previously you would go to your county to apply for a well permit, but as of 2014, with the passage of SGMA, you now have to get usually county support as well as your local GSA support. And so I'm not sure if there is a specific GSA in your area. I would use the website resource again for the Find Your GSA. And I think any tribal partners that are part of that would appear. And again, they're the ones who now determine the long-term water strategy of the region. And so they're the ones who you would actually have to get final approval for a new well. And again, that's the Find Your GSA slide that we had up earlier. The video will be posted. This conversation may be posted, it may not be posted, but when the video is posted, I would recommend for Liv to go to the Find Your GSA slide and scan the QR code. And again, that's how you would find who is your GSA. Again, this person or this organization as of 2014 is the person in charge of your area's long-term water politics, in a sense. So like Tulare County is right here by Fresno. And they don't use any groundwater, or at least they're not allowed to dig wells either. Fresno County, North Kings GSA, has actually said that we're okay for a while. And so we don't have any concerns around being able to get permitted for new wells or replacement wells, which is actually what most of our growers need. I do not have the answer to Juan's question about how to treat the water once you know it has high alkalinity or high pH. Again, whoever's testing your water, they probably have better resources for you than I would at the moment. Yes, and as Dave has mentioned, again, well permits usually come from counties. The governor's emergency order requires the county to consult with relevant GSAs. And again, there was a bill, and it's probably going to be reintroduced again, correct? That would make this into statute, and different partners have been working on it over the last year and a half or so. But again, for my experience, it kind of depends on your county. And so again, getting in touch with your GSA and speaking to folks there about what's happening gives you some insight into whether or not, again, you're going to be able to like dig new wells or replacement wells. And in some areas, it's just not quite feasible. Again, Tulare County has, again, I think the language we use is, I mean, a well is a hole in the ground. And in Tulare County, they've punched one too many holes. And so now they're experiencing what they call subsidence. So literally the ground has sunk in many areas, a couple 100 feet. And it sounds kind of wild, but it is very true. And so they rely largely on surface water there for their farms. So yeah, so what I understand of groundwater monitoring, there are water quality coalitions as well from the state board. And so every year, pretty much the state water boards require that growers submit a nitrogen use report. And that's one of the ways they are tracking quality of groundwater. And again, all of that is region specific. California, as you all know, is incredibly challenging with 58 counties and multiple geographical reasons, geological reasons for it to be broken up in certain ways. And so it is a little bit tricky to say how frequently they are testing for nitrates. Different RCDs and water quality coalitions are at different states of interaction with how much monitoring they do. Again, in our area, I know our Kings River Water Quality Coalition, when they test domestic wells for water quality, they're normally just testing for nitrates. I think as they're moving forward, they're going to be testing for other things, including I think E. coli is what they had mentioned to me. And again, we get a lot of that done locally with a lab here for folks who are just kind of curious. There are other places that you can send samples, but I want to say, unfortunately, we're kind of backed up at some of the state resources for kind of this kind of lab work, which is why we try to prioritize local projects locally. But again, I would definitely get in touch with your resource conservation districts, your GSAs. And again, if you guys have a lot of questions about SGMA, I'm trying to recall if there is a SGMA workshop this year. Sometimes I feel like we have talked about it so much, and yet there is still so much left to say or ask about it since it was first passed and now it's being implemented in a sense. But it is still a bit of an ongoing conversation. So hopefully that answers the questions around testing. Groundwater Live, I know definitely shows you at least once every 8 months what the water levels look like in terms of testing. Again, I'm just going to say it is a little bit tricky because it depends on the RCD and the GSA's current work. And they are working on their outreach to small growers. And so like Dave has mentioned in the chat, there is currently some funding and their DWR, the Department of Water Resources, is really hoping to engage small scale growers more with SGMA. So if this is the first you've heard of it, we're a little bit worried, but also we're already working on it to make sure that folks are kind of caught up to what's happening. And so that if folks have concerns or issues, they're able to advocate as well as find allies to help with that. Well, so there's a question around, there's two questions here around whether or not local jurisdictions have the right to regulate groundwater if there are no SGMA basins. That question's a little bit trickier for me Dave, if you can, I think you might know more about that than me, but areas with no particularly assigned GSA, I think these are what we're calling, I'm having a Sunday brain fart for a second there. I'll get back to that question, but there's another question from Elaine about recommending data loggers that can be installed in small farm wells. I again would say if you have a local irrigation district, so in Fresno, there's the Fresno Irrigation District, and they actually submit seasonal well reports because they're monitoring wells in our area. And so you might see if there's a local irrigation district that might already be doing this, and it'll give you a better idea of how close you are to that groundwater live. The groundwater live data is, again, more statewide, but there should be a local irrigation district that does it more frequently. And so again, you might not, you don't want to leave a line going into your well necessarily the whole time. And again, it'll fluctuate quite a bit, and there's a risk of things getting caught in there. So we don't have anything that actually hangs out in there, from what I understand. Dave has joined us on this end. Dave, do you want to answer the question around areas with no sigma basins identified? I'm blanking out on it again.
Well, I mean, like you said, I mean, irrigation districts have control over the use of surface water. They don't control groundwater in their districts, but maybe under Sigma they do. But areas outside Sigma, the counties still issue the permits for the wells. So ultimately, the counties do have authority to issue the permit or not issue the permit. There have been counties that declared moratoriums on new wells. And so I tell people, you know, you can always go to the Board of Supervisors and try your luck if you think things are not going well. But no, there's no other really regulatory groundwater thing outside of these Sigma basins. And then, of course, if the basin gets adjudicated, you know, then perhaps like in Borrego, they just abandon the GSAs, shut it down, and just go with the court-ordered adjudication. They have a water master usually once the basin gets adjudicated. In Cuyama, that's going on right now. The adjudication is underway. The GSA still exists, so you have parallel processes going on. And it's hard to know how it's going to turn out. I personally fear the whole adjudication process for small farmers because you have to appear in court, right? So you have to have an attorney.
Do you want to explain what that means for those who might not know what that term refers to? Yeah,
so in state law, people have the right to petition the court to adjudicate a groundwater basin. So all it takes is one water user, one farmer who's pumping water, decides that he's going to get a better deal in the court than he is from the GSA, and so they file to the court, basically asking for the court to adjudicate, and that is to divvy up the groundwater. Basically, say, okay, there's this much groundwater sustainable yield, and so we're going to divide it up among the people who've been using it. So if you haven't been using it, you're not going to get any water out of the court. And the people who've been using the most are going to get the most water out of the court. And so what happened in Cuyama is that the small farmers had to come together, you know, basically to hire an attorney to represent them. And they're spending quite a bit of money. They told me they're spending about $2,500 a month a piece just to be represented in court. So if this kind of thing spreads around California, small farmers are going to be at a tremendous disadvantage. Now, we're going to set up a legal clinic at UC Davis Law School that's going to be available to help small farmers with this, among other lawsuits. So they're going to start to work on this adjudication issue as soon as we can get it set up, as soon as we get this DWR agreement in place. So we see it as a potential big problem. There's a special law that was passed in 2015, sponsored by the Farm Bureau, that essentially allows a rapid adjudication. So if pumpers that represent 50% of the pumpers and more than 75% of the water being pumped get together and agree on something, then they can just impose it on everybody. So that happened in Borrego. And so it's not happening in Cuyama so far. I guess they
Dave,
don't
is
meet
that
those.
50% of the total users, or the
Yeah,
users that
50%
represent
of the
50% of the
users.
pumping?
If you can get 50% of the users who represent 75% of the water pumped,
I see.
then you can impose this solution on everybody. Now there's a bill in the legislature that would basically require the court to consider the how this will affect small farmers, and so we'll see what the prospects for that bill is.
And I'd be remiss to say, to not mention how important it is for small farmers to pay attention to these things. As everyone here knows, small farmers are incredibly busy. They're focused on planting and harvesting and running their small businesses, and rarely do you guys have the time and wherewithal to go digging through policy recommendations and whatever's happening at the county supervisors meeting and all of that. But if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And so I think it's incredibly important for small farmers to keep a close eye on what is happening at your local GSA, who's being represented, which voices are not being included. And the same thing goes for any other well oversight. For instance, there are well, Dave mentioned it, but well permits, right? The county issues well permits, and there's new permit regulations being explored in some counties. And so the county puts together a committee to oversee, come up with a new policy on how to divvy up those permits and what to allow, how, when, measurements of water use over time. And, by and large, small farmers aren't represented on those panels, aren't represented on those committees. And therefore, the needs and interests and the unique circumstances of a small farm are usually not taken into account. And so it's absolutely important to not just pay attention, but to speak up, to organize, to get together with other small farmers and make sure what's going on, and make sure that the policies that are being proposed aren't going to adversely affect a small farmer. Because the needs of a small, if you're growing on, 30 different crops on a 5-acre parcel, selling to local markets, your needs might not be the same as somebody who's growing, 1,000 acres of a single commodity, or a residential well user. So it's really important to recognize that your voices need to be included in that process, because it's only going to continue. We're getting rain right now, but the drought we just went through, it certainly wasn't the first drought, and it certainly won't be the last either. So it's important to stay vigilant.
Well, one of the problems of Sigma and the wells is that the water level can continue to fall for the next 20 years, right? And so the GSA is supposed to project at what level they're going to stabilize the water level. And that would be an important thing to know if you were going to drill a well or lower a well, right? Because you wouldn't want to have the water continue to drop below the level of your well. And then there's another problem, which is these allocations that some GSAs are, saying you can only pump so much water this year, and you can pump less water next year and less water the year after, and so forth. And so you would really need to know how you're going to cope with that. Are you going to change crops? Are you going to buy some more land? obviously a large farmer has options that small farmers don't. And so, but it's critical to understand what these GSAs are doing. And that's hopefully what this project with DWR is going to do. We're going to try to identify the small farmers and then reach out to them with the information specific to where they are, right? And see if they can get, at least some of them can get somewhat more involved in the GSA process.
Yeah, and Dave's right. When that happens, it's really important for folks to be regionally engaged. Again, my parents have been in agriculture for quite a long time, and these conversations around water that have just emerged, I had this conversation with a couple hundred folks at this point, and it is a bit overwhelming. And so again, hopefully this video is a short introduction to how you kind of assess your water situation. If you have questions about additional resources, again, like Dave has mentioned, we really do recommend checking out what's happening at DWR, as well as Groundwater Live, which again is a thing that exists because of Sigma. I do want to clarify to Elaine too, it's true the irrigation districts usually control surface water, but some of them also help the local RCDs to and the GSAs to kind of track groundwater movement. And so I know our irrigation district, in concert with our GSA, has plans for groundwater recharge basins. And so they've been tracking those things together to kind of make sure that we're on target for our 20-year goals or our current plan. And so again, some folks have this information readily available. It is difficult to do it constantly on your own farm. We've reserved, I guess, well sounding for folks who are basically in the last 20%, 10%, 25 to 10% of their wells. And I think the question we get quite a bit is, can I go deeper? And that's not as simple of a question as it seems to be, because part of it has to do with your geology as well as geography, in terms of politics / feasibility. And so again, I highly recommend getting in touch with your local GSAs, your RCDs. It sounds like the alphabet soup of water at this point. And it kind of is. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to the Small Farms Network. We are, again, working to develop more resources. And so even if you're just like, I have a question or I need a resource, that's something that's really important. Because again, our growers don't have to adjudicate water rights in our area, but I do know that there are other areas that are network services, and that has become more of a question for them. And so again, it very much so varies from region to region. There's a question if there is an initiative to improve groundwater levels other than regulating the usage of it. It kind of goes hand in hand, honestly. It's going hand in hand. And so again, and it's tricky because there is no short-term solution to improving groundwater levels. Again, we had anticipated a very dry winter, and now we're getting a very wet winter and actually snowy winter, I think, right? And so I know in our area, again, they're going to be releasing a lot more surface water earlier. 2 years ago, there was one delivery, and that was twice. And then last year, they tripled that. So there were 3 months of deliveries. So there's 6 deliveries. This year, they're going to start as early as March. But another way that we are not prepared is to keep that groundwater here to do groundwater recharge on certain farms. And some of the basins are available, but it's not quite enough yet. And so depending on your region and how far ahead they are, there is a little bit of both.
Yeah, there are lots of efforts underway to do groundwater recharge. It's just a question of whether there's enough surface water available to do that. It's like the environmental community is trying to get more water to stay in the rivers to keep the fish alive, and the farmers are trying to get more water out of the rivers to recharge the groundwater. And so, we have this constant political conflict over that. And but people have found things that they didn't know before. They found these ancient rivers coming out of the Sierra, and apparently if you put water into them, it goes right into the groundwater. So we're learning things that people haven't been paying much attention to. right? We built all these dams. We have almost 1,500 dams in California, and that's the way water was stored. But now everybody realized we need to be putting the water into the ground. And so, so there's a lot of activity on that. The Public Policy Institute has projected that it won't be possible to recharge the groundwater sufficiently to make up for the overdraft, right? And so they're still projecting that 500,000 acres or more will have to come out of production in the San Joaquin Valley. And so the question becomes, well, whose acres are going to come out of production? And so that, again, is something to pay attention to.
And if you're interested in more information about the drought, we have a workshop later this afternoon. They'll be digging in a little deeper into some of those drought questions. So come join us for that.
Yeah, I will put that it is an ongoing, again, as I mentioned, it's kind of ongoing because every time we think we know something, we learn something new. And again, it's very region specific, both the strategy and the politics. And so it is really important right now to kind of start listening, even if you're not ready to have the conversation. But again, if you're planning to farm in the next few years, it's not just, do you have access to water? But again, what is the source of water? Here, it's like a bigger question mark than it used to be. And so again, growers who didn't need to know these things or might be set for quite some time, it's not true anymore. And so it's really important, again, for folks to start monitoring their own situation as well as understanding how they are regionally set. And if there is any way, again, UCANR can help in supporting small scale growers. We are happy to try to put those resources together. I think we're all still wrapping our heads around, again, how much like support there needs to be from the legal end to kind of the business end of it, right? As well as working with USDA. And USDA has been a little bit slower to kind of transform or develop programs that support growers. But it seems like they're willing at the moment to kind of make a few changes, maybe not through the Farm Bill this coming year, but there have been conversations around how to build resiliency for growers through these kind of challenging like times, honestly. So Dave, there is a question in the chat or in the question in A about putting small ponds on farms to collect rainwater. And then they asked if there were any regulations around this.
Well, there are always regulations here in California. So, yeah, I mean, would the water normally run into a stream, right? So that would be considered surface water, and so appropriated under the laws of surface water appropriation. You know, there's just a lot of questions about, you know, where the pond would be and what runoff is it collecting and so forth. So it certainly is possible, but you would need to consult with the water board, the regional water board, about whether it would be allowed where you are. There's just a lot of interest in ponds on the North Coast, you know, basically to use for frost problems with wine grapes. But again, it's like, you know, are you taking water out of a stream? And so do you need a water right in order to do that? And then California has rules about how long you can store water, because the water right is not for storing water, it's for using the water, right? I mean, the law says you have to put the water to beneficial use, right? So it can't just sit there. So there's a length of time, and I've forgotten right now what the length of time is, but it's a somewhat limited length of time in which the water can sit there. And people have asked me, well, where did that length of time come from? And so far, the water board hasn't been able to give us an answer, but maybe we'll get one eventually. But yes, a pond is certainly a possibility. It's just a question of, well, where's the water coming from? And, you know, do you have a right to that water? Mhm.
And one way that we are kind of getting around the loopholes, I think, in our area is a lot of our vegetable growers do not use surface water deliveries because they don't come quite frequently enough. You get 24 hours twice a month, spaced about 2 weeks apart, if that is a delivery month. And so although folks folks don't usually use it, but then we're having this other issue of not enough water being produced from their wells because maybe they're surrounded by heavier water users and or deeper wells. And so they've been fallowing inadvertently in response because you don't have enough water to manage that part of your property. And so we've recommended these folks, when the deliveries do happen, to kind of flood irrigate those parts of their farm that they're not using. And so it's not officially a pond, but it does help with long-term groundwater recharge, because before they were doing 0, and now they might do a couple times a year, which again has been useful. And it's a strange way to get around the, like, can you have a recharge pond? But again, as Dave has mentioned, there are a lot of regulatory concerns. And so we've just, again, talked to folks about before moving there, again, just seeing what their capacity is for even engaging in this practice. So one of the ways that, again, a couple of growers have begun this idea of groundwater recharge on their own farms is just, again, taking advantage of surface water deliveries on parts of their farm where they're not doing anything at the moment. And so again, there are a few ways to kind of help your farm situation out. And it does require some innovation, or at least a little bit thinking about. And so it's been a productive conversation with growers, but again, it's still a very novel concept. This idea that, you know what, I have space that I don't use because I can't use it. And so what if I just put water on it?
Yeah, and so again, it's like, well, what are you growing, right? I mean, if you're growing vegetables, right, then you're subject to the Food Safety Modernization Act, the federal law that has come into play. And so the water has to meet certain water quality standards in order to be applied to vegetables. And so does this surface water meet that criteria? If it doesn't, then you would have to treat that water before you actually applied it. So it's not a simple matter to just substitute surface water for groundwater, depending on what you're growing.
We are possibly going to end a little bit early, but I did want to ask generally if folks had any topics or suggestions for additional conversation or presentation. Again, when DWR's Sigma for Small Farmers becomes implemented, you'll probably see Dave and I again. You'll probably see us again with that conversation in combination with partners at CAFF. I've written down, again, this, if you're going to do this groundwater recharge pond, we could probably do something on that. It's actually been a suggestion given to us by a few other partners out of ANR as well about why growers are maybe opposed to this. And I had my concerns, but also it's an interesting idea. It could be very beneficial, but I think we have to kind of look into this a little bit more to see what advice we could give on it. But if folks had any additional things they were interested about that maybe we didn't talk about, that we could talk about, I'd be interested in reading them or at least noting them down. I had originally intended to hopefully promote UCANR's drought survey during this workshop. Unfortunately, the very wet winter that was unpredicted rendered about a third of the survey unusable. So it had to go back to kind of get updated a little bit. So we will see. I think our goal is to hope to launch it later in the spring, early summer, so that folks have time over the summer to kind of think about their water situation and see how things have been. Again, it has been a challenging, I think, 2 or 3 years from COVID to the drought to now this current flooding. We're actually hoping, we don't know what to expect this summer, honestly, as we're doing technical assistance on the ground and working with growers. What's going to happen? We hope that there's less demand on groundwater, and that the surface water helps. We're also hoping that maybe there's a decreased demand for larger farms who can afford it to be requesting new wells. And so that smaller scale farms who need to kind of just catch up to the curve have that breathing space, both financially and time-wise. Because like I mentioned, depending on your area and the demand, the prices for wells are incredibly high, but also there's a wait time of 3 to 12 months in some areas. And so that cuts into, again, I think, a farming schedule for small farms. And so you can't really go without water with the kind of summers we've been having. But for all I know, a mild temperate summer, it's wild.
Well, with that, yeah, there's some suggestions in the comments about future workshops. We've got one for pros and cons of ponds. Yeah, so really appreciate folks coming out here, and Lilian, especially for you coming out here and sharing your resources and info. We can send additional information to all the attendees with any relevant links that you shared. So keep an eye out for that email. And besides that, thank you all for attending. Just want to put a plug in. Next up here at the conference, we've got a workshop on indoor aquaponics, another one on branding with your values, and then at least 50 other workshops coming up over the next several days. So we encourage you guys to check those out. And again, thank you so much, Lilian, Dave, for jumping in there. And enjoy the rest of your conference, everybody.